What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Cream City Cast. This is our Badgers post-game review of the Badgers' 28-17 victory over Iowa. My name is Dylan Piccolo. I'm joined today by Alexander Juneau, editor-in-chief of Cream City Central. Al, what's up, my man? Feels good to be back after a W.
Yeah, I'm excited that we got back on the winning track. Night games in Kinnick are never an easy thing.
No, and it was definitely an uphill climb for the Badgers until the second half came along. Iowa was really holding their own, and I know we discussed this a little bit off the air, but I wanted to get us started with talking about how good of a win this actually is. We know Iowa, obviously, playing at Kinnick is a very tough place to play and a tough place to win itself. But as it is for the team, is Iowa a good enough win for the Badgers to sort of say the Badgers win out and everything like that, will this be a win that they can have a notch on their belt for?
I think so. I'm not sure exactly how good Iowa is. We'll find out a little bit more as their season goes on when they have to play their cross-conference games against the other good schools. But, we're talking about a team that beat Northern Illinois, beat Northern Iowa. Neither of those schools are great football programs, but they're both usually pretty decent schools on the lower end. I believe that's FBS, not FCS. And they beat Iowa State as well, so that's another Power 5 win, and that one was on the road. None of that really means a whole lot. We got to see kind of how they do in Big Ten play, but I think their defense is legit. I think that we're going to see them have a pretty good Big Ten campaign. This was a team that it's an entirely different team than last year's team, but last year they beat Ohio State pretty handily in Kinnick, and I think that matters. I think it matters that the Badgers got a good win to start Big Ten play.
Yeah, and I was looking at Iowa's schedule a little bit. They kind of are under the Wisconsin schedule of last year, as they really play only one of the power teams out in the Eastern Division of the Big Ten Conference schedule against Penn State, which is a home game, actually. So that could have some implications. If they play decent against Penn State, it could make the win look a little bit better. And, I think it's really – the Badgers did what they needed to do. The road to the Big Ten, championship game, for Wisconsin at least, usually goes through Kinnick or wherever they're playing Iowa. So – to take care of business and to come back as they did, I was really impressed. I had said in our preview podcast with Nick Osen, who's out doing a group project tonight, I had said that I had picked the Badgers actually to lose, and my reasoning behind that was I didn't think Alex Hornibrook could really make those big throws to win, and my God, did he ever make some big throws?
Yeah, I was pretty impressed. You never really know how a guy's going to bounce back after a loss like that, and Hornibrook has definitely struggled with consistency at times in finding his place. And I think we all remember how Joel Stave was once he got the yips. He couldn't really throw, and you always worry about something like that sort of setting into somebody's mind where they're just not really processing it right. But he looks sharp. If he played that way against BYU, we're talking about a 4-0 team. And if he plays that way, there might not be another team in the Big Ten West that has any chance of stopping them. And Penn State and Michigan should look out too.
Absolutely. And I liked what Paul Chryst kind of did with the route combinations for Hornibrook. They did a lot of too wide out on the left or on the short side of the field. And they really forced the Iowa secondary to they took away the deep ball a lot. There was a little bit of confusion, especially with when they had AJ Taylor and Kendrick Pryor, AJ Taylor and Danny Davis on one side, where AJ Taylor would go deep, and the cornerbacks and the safeties did not communicate well for Iowa, and they both actually usually went with the deep guy, leaving a nice underneath route open to the sideline for Hornibrook, which is pretty much his strength, hitting those nice intermediate passes. Is there one Badger receiver that kind of stood out to you? Obviously, statistics will tell you one thing, but are there anything from the eye test that the Badgers kind of, I don't know, which receiver do you think stood out?
I think AJ Taylor was really the guy in the first 3 games, and I think this game we kind of saw. It's tough to call it a breakout game with the stats that he had, but Danny Davis he just looks like an NFL receiver. He's very athletic, his routes are crisp, and he seems to always come up with a catch exactly when you need him. I think he caught the game-winning touchdown or the go-ahead touchdown. I know he had 1 touchdown catch, but he's just pretty good. I wanted to ask you a question, though, before we really get into analyzing the Badgers team. Let's talk about the Big Ten West for a second. If you look up and down the records of the teams in the Big Ten West, this is what you got. Oh, shoot, I just closed the tab on my phone, so literally give me 1 second. I'm just going to kill some time.
You're good.
I thought that the team that was going to get us was Northwestern, and looking at how they've done up to this point in the season, every other team in the Big Ten West besides Northwestern is 0-1. Northwestern won their first conference game, but before that they were 0-2. They lost to Duke and they lost to Akron. Duke's actually a pretty good football program this year, and they lost to Akron by 2 points, so it's not really like they got their butts kicked by Akron. But I don't know if I'm afraid of a 1-2 Northwestern team, and when you look at the rest of the schools in the conference, or in our half of the conference, in the divisional side, there's not much to scare you. Who do you think that the Badgers realistically have to worry about on this side of the division?
I don't want to say that they don't have to worry about anyone, because I think that the Badgers may have taken a brief step back from their talent from last season. And I don't think anyone really took the charge. I know you mentioned Northwestern. I think their running back having to medically retire. His name was Jeremy Larkin, Barry Larkin's, I think it's his nephew. That's their leading rusher on the year. And I know they had Justin Jackson previously, who actually was a very good running back. And Northwestern really uses that run to set up Clayton Thorson and to get him opportunities to score and get the ball downfield. And Pat Fitzgerald likes to play defense. So, I don't think Northwestern's necessarily poised to make a run. If I had to say one team that I'm not necessarily afraid of, but I might be afraid of in a 1-game setting, I don't think Minnesota is that bad. I know they got killed by Maryland and they played some cupcakes, but if you're gonna put a gun to my head and tell me what team to choose, I would say that game against Minnesota, just because it's a rivalry game. If one they could slip up in the West, but I'm honestly not really concerned about any team in the West. And like I had mentioned previously, I think winning that game in Iowa basically solidified our opportunity to go to the Big Ten championship this year. And this will be the 3rd year in a row. So I don't really see any teams. Do you?
Nothing really jumps out at me. I think Minnesota's tied for Iowa with the best record at 3-1, but like you said, they played cupcakes, and I know the Badgers played cupcakes too, but you look at the schedule and you look at the teams that they're going to play and stuff like that, and you almost want to think to yourself, would BYU win the Big Ten West? And you just got to think about that for a bit.
You're right. BYU's ranked 20th. I know that I think they have a pretty tough game coming up here. I'm not. Let me look this up real quick.
They play Stanford this weekend. No, it's Notre Dame. They play Stanford.
They play Washington on Saturday at Washington, and I really think that the Badgers fans better be cheering for BYU, because the better BYU looks, the less worse that loss looks, and helps our chances to winning the Big Ten championship, which is what they have to do to sneak into the playoff if that's your ultimate goal. But I think BYU would have a pretty good chance to. Especially beating Wisconsin. It's kind of crazy to say, because gosh, I mean, BYU's just, I mean, their offense didn't play that well, and they kind of screwed Wisconsin up on those jet sweeps. But it's just, yeah, I guess BYU. I mean, I think they would beat every team in the Big Ten, the West at least.
Yeah. I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to talk about, but we can get back to dissecting the Badger Iowa game.
No, I'm definitely that was definitely interesting to talk about, and I guess I never really thought about it like that, but that's what we got you here for, to think of those abstract thoughts. And I guess BU would be the Big Ten West champions. I mean, the, the the Big Ten West is such a, yeah, I'm going to stick on this for a second. The Big Ten West is actually a dumpster fire other than Wisconsin. And I don't, and Iowa, I guess. I mean, you don't want to discredit Iowa because I do think that they're a pretty decent team. But man, I mean, there's not many other, like in the Power Five conferences. I mean, there's not really many other conference or divisions that are that bad. I mean, I guess you could say some of the maybe you could argue the ACC teams, but I don't even know if that you could do that.
No, it's sort of crazy. And like, let's give Scott Frost some time at Nebraska because that's a good program. He can probably turn it around. They really have a geographic advantage with the areas that they're able to recruit because there's not really another FBS school with any football history in that area. And Nebraska produces a good amount of in-state talent every year. But like, it's really bad. Like if Iowa and Nebraska are having down years, and we're talking about the best two teams, is the second best team is Northwestern, and then there's a huge drop off after that. Like if Iowa's not the second best team, I think it'll be sort of interesting. But like long term, the Big Ten needs one of these teams to figure it out and be something to challenge Wisconsin. Otherwise, it's going to be the national media story every year that Wisconsin's cakewalking. And you kind of hope for Wisconsin's sake that they figure it out, but they don't really figure it out, that they're like top 25 teams, but not top 10, top 15 teams. But, you know, when are we going to get there? You know, Minnesota has been Wisconsin's little brother for years now in football, and it hasn't been competitive. And, I'm totally blanking on his name. What's their coach's name?
The row the boat guy.
Yeah, I know he was the Central Michigan or Western Michigan coach.
Western Michigan.
Yeah.
I feel like we should know this. So
yeah,
I'm gonna do this for the culture here. I'm gonna give you 5 seconds before I look it up.
Oh, I just looked it up. It's PJ Fleck. Okay.
There. Yeah. Okay.
That was painful. We should have known that, and we definitely knew it, but like it just was on the tip of our tongue, couldn't get it out. So that wasn't great. But
no,
he's got some time to sort of rebuild that program. I know he puts a big emphasis on recruiting. I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast before, but during a recruiting trip last fall, he actually took a helicopter between two high school games he was scouting. And the high schools were only about a half an hour apart, so it was really more of just a power move to say I took a helicopter between two high school games. So, like, if you're doing that, like, you better at least get those recruits because you just rented a helicopter for a random Friday night. But we'll kind of see who figures it out next and sort of what happens. I don't think Iowa's a bad program, but they're not on the level that the top 4 or 5 in the Big Ten are.
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring it up that the division really needs to get their stuff together because I feel like they have been. I mean, look at the coaches that have been brought in to revitalize these programs in the Big Ten West. Scott Frost, Lovie Smith, Jeff Brom, Kurt Ferentz is still doing a good job in Iowa, and PJ Fleck, and then Pat Fitzgerald. I mean, there's good coaches in this division. There really are good coaches. And, you know, I think that they're just, I don't know if it's the recruiting that's bad or what, but they just can't, I'm really disappointed what I've seen from Purdue this year because I had Purdue being a lot better than I thought they were.
Yeah, I really have no idea what we're looking at in terms of what's going to happen the next few years, but this year it just doesn't look great. The Big Ten as a whole looks kind of down. They sort of had these weird non-conference games that they just flubbed against FCS schools.
Yep.
Just weird.
Like Rutgers going down to Buffalo. That was awful.
I mean, you always expect Rutgers to be like the worst team in the Big Ten, so
Yeah.
like that's not the worst thing that's happened. But
No,
when you
I heard a joke and someone said that the Big Ten brought in the wrong New York area team after they lost to Buffalo.
uh, honestly, are they wrong though? Like Buffalo has probably had a better basketball team the last few seasons for sure too, and
No, you're right.
like would they be worse? Like honestly, I always this is totally off topic, and we're not doing a great job of recapping
No,
the
but I
Iowa
think
game.
this is
But
interesting.
one more comment on it. You know, they always talk about how relegation would never work in pro sports in the United States, but I think it'd be really interesting for college if you had a mid-major conference that you worked with, because when you look at the teams that like South Dakota State has had the last few years, like their basketball team is really good. Their football team is really good. I don't know how it would work if you would move up and down for all sports and stuff like that, but you
Yeah.
can't tell me that they're not more competitive than Rutgers is right now. Like Mike Daum
No,
would be
you're right.
Rutgers' best player for basketball, and you know they're winning games like 80-5 and 90-6 in football. Like, and we're just a few seasons. I think we're 2 seasons removed from North Dakota State coming to Iowa and beating them here. So, like, there's some legitimately good FCS schools that might be better than some of these Big Ten programs we're talking about right now.
You're right. Like I can't deny you there, but all right, let's jump back on the track here. I think that might be a good podcast for another day though. I definitely think that we can definitely have a nice long debate about that.
It's definitely something to revisit in 6 weeks, maybe in the off season or while we're waiting for bowl season.
For sure. All right. So Wisconsin won 28-17. They were down 17-14 after quarter number 3 and scored 2 touchdowns. One, like you had mentioned, to I think it was the last one was to all these receivers give me so
Well, the
messed
last
up.
one was a run that was sort of like a fluke.
Yeah, the one that put us up, the one to AJ Taylor for 17 yards. So there was that, and then a kind of a creative end around play, which I've been calling for the Badgers to do, by Alec Ingold for 33 yards to kind of seal the deal. But I want to talk about the 2 turnovers Iowa had that really, when Iowa had a chance to really grab a hold of the momentum. Dakota Dixon with that amazing strip that definitely. Whoa. Did you hear that?
No.
Oh, this video started to play. I can edit that. All right. Where was I? Dakota Dixon? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that play that Dakota Dixon had on special teams where he punched the ball out and stripped it and recovered it. And I know Nick has done, Nick Osen, who's not with us today, has done some pretty good work on getting Dakota Dixon's thoughts after BYU and talk about how they're going to bounce back from it. And Dakota Dixon was pretty much leading that charge.
Yeah. When you talk about sort of senior leadership, those are the type of plays that come to mind. You know, he's the old guy amongst the secondary. He's a senior. He's been a contributor for, I don't remember if he played as a freshman, but at least the last 2 years. And those are the moments that you want him here for. He's a mentor to the rest of the guys. And when you need a gritty big play, he's one of the guys you can count on.
And another big play that I thought changed it was Conley on that third and 2, I believe, or 3rd and goal from the 2-yard line. He absolutely shed that right tackle, laid out, took down the Iowa running back and forced him to kick a field goal. I mean, those are the plays you need, especially from the seniors when you have such a youthful secondary. And I think that the secondary needs a little work, and I know that was one of my keys to the game, and I think the Badgers avoided a loss even though the secondary didn't really play all that well.
Yeah, we've talked about Ryan Connolly a couple of times when we're recapping the games. He's just had a sort of impressive season. His athleticism sort of pops, and he's been making plays when the Badgers need him.
So if you had to give a MVP for the offense, who would you give it to? Not Alex Hornibrook.
I was going to say Alex Hornibrook. I saw Pro Football Focus's All Big Ten team this week, and Jake Ferguson was on it. He's been sort of fantastic. You know, he's really developing into a nice player. I know another one of our writers, Gavin Jurg, who writes for Cream City Central. He's talked to him a couple of times. He thinks that he's eventually going to be a first-round draft pick. I don't know if I'm quite ready to go that high on Jake Ferguson, but he's been really impressive. Like, throughout the course of the Iowa game, but really throughout the course of the season, I think he might have the most catches on the team. Maybe he's right up there with AJ Taylor, but he's been the go-to guy when Hornibrook needs a completion.
And that's what we've kind of discussed on this podcast, at least recently, with Fumagalli, leaving for the draft. And there isn't, Quintez Cephas, obviously, with his issues. Danny Davis was out for the first 2 games. Who's going to be the go-to guy for Hornibrook? And I think Jake Ferguson's starting to develop into that. And I think the rapport between those two are really good and Ferguson does a really good job of getting open. I thought that, even the times where he didn't get the ball, he was open in the seams. He was open, finding ways through the defense. And I think that's what you need to give Hornibrook some success. You got to get him easy completions and make sure that you're wide open. And I think that's important. Another thing I wanted to touch on was Jonathan Taylor, 25 carries, 113 yards, kind of back-to-back games for Taylor where he did eclipse that 100-yard mark, but it was on high carries, and he hasn't really broken that big play out yet in the last 2 games. Do you have any concerns with Jonathan Taylor moving forward?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much of it I want to pin on the offensive line not getting the type of push that they did last year. And that's not necessarily what gets you the big plays, but it's sort of what bumps up that average. It's the difference between getting hit for the first time at 2 yards or the first time at 5 yards. And that's sort of a big deal if you're getting hit by the linebacker, the defensive lineman and stuff like that versus the safety in the corner. I know a lot of people were sort of reacting that Jonathan Taylor wasn't getting the carries down the stretch. But, we're talking about a guy who's still got 25 carries. I think that the coaching staff might be just trying to save him up for when they really need him. You can't really just give the guy 35 carries every night and expect him to be impactful deep into the season. I'll be curious to see how he looks against Nebraska. We're talking about a Nebraska team that's probably markedly worse than this Iowa team. And he'll be coming off a week's rest where he's going to not the Badgers had played 4 weeks in a row, so this rest period might be helpful.
And you're right. I thought one concern I do have with Taylor, and I saw it on the first drive of the game. They kind of ran a stretch play, and there was definitely an open lane, and Ingold was kind of leading the charge out to the left, and I saw Taylor try to cut back, cut through the gap and kind of run through people a little bit. I know his vision is something that we've discussed more than a couple times on this podcast, and I think that really needs to be a focus of Badgers fans watching the game, is watch his vision and see where the lead blocker's going. And yes, not every time you're supposed to follow the lead blocker's tail, but look where the space is around him and see where he's trying to really try to thread the needle through that defensive line and offensive line. Because I think that he's just been running into a lot of big piles and not bouncing off of it, because I think that's what really makes him good. When he can bounce off and get a secondary guy trying to arm tackle him on the outside, I think that's really when he gets successful.
I totally agree. That's sort of the point I was trying to build to, is that when you get these secondary guys trying to tackle him, Jonathan Taylor is like too big and too strong for them, and they just don't really have a good chance. But when he has to go up against the linebackers of the Big Ten, the linebackers of the Big Ten are just massive dudes. Like, they're going to be able to tackle him a lot of the times, and they'll get a full grip on him. And it's a lot tougher to make those big plays. So we'll sort of see what happens, and maybe they can get some creative blocking schemes. But I think a lot of it will just be if Hornibrook can continue to pass like he did against Iowa, then we'll sort of see that spiral into some big running plays and some big gains, at least fingers crossed.
How important do you think getting turnovers are for this Badgers team to be successful?
I think they got to get a couple every game, especially in the big games when you're going up against these really talented offenses like the Ohio States, the Penn States of the world. I don't think you're going to beat them if you can't force a single turnover. I think you sort of need that, and I think it energizes the offense and it gets the defense more amped up for the next time they come on the field.
And I think that's, when you look at the Ohio State game last year, there was a few turnovers that the Badgers had that led them back into that game and gave this offense short field. And, and I think being on a shorter field obviously is an advantage, but especially for this Badgers offense working on a shorter field in the clutch time. And I think that's got to be the number one win for the Badgers every single week is the turnover battle. If they can win the turnover battle every week, they will be in at the bare minimum every single game they play in.
Yeah, and that's sort of where they need to be. This Badgers team has been sneakily good on defense, despite the fact that they're known as running back university and knowing for their offensive linemen. They've been a really good defense the last few years, and they got to be able to get those turnovers. I know Scott Nelson's a guy we talk about a lot for the turnovers and just the potential to play make from that free safety position. Dakota Dixon, the safeties in Wisconsin are really where you're going to see a lot of the turnovers just based on sort of how they play coverage. We'll see sort of how the defensive line works into it because they really got to get some pressure because you can't leave that young secondary out in coverage forever because the good quarterbacks in the Big Ten, they're going to pick you apart if you have to play coverage for more than 5-6 seconds. And they're improving in that regard, I would say. They didn't get great pressure on the Iowa quarterback, but they got it when they needed it, and they were able to shut down the drives late.
Absolutely. And I think that coming back from being down 3 at the end of the third quarter kind of will give this team a boost heading into the weeks to come. So with that being said, the Badgers hit the bye week this week with a chance to get a little healthy. They got a couple nicks and bruises. Van Ginkel will be good to get him healthy. Obviously, a good week to get everyone prepared. They host Nebraska on the 6th, and then the following week they'll play at Michigan, which the time of that game hasn't come out yet, but I imagine that it'll be probably a night game at the Big House in Michigan. So moving forward for our podcast series, we're going to get you probably like a bye week check-in over the next week here, kind of update you on the Big Ten and any other news that we have in regards to the Badgers, maybe get Nick Osen's reactions from the game at Kinnick. He was there and got to talk to some of the players after the game. So I think I am ready to put this one to bed, Al, if you don't have anything else to say.
Well, I'm just excited for us to get into basketball season so we can start talking about this team. We got 4 weeks until the red-white scrimmage, I think, and then we'll finally be back to basketball.
Yep. Basketball is definitely one of our good things. We'll have a Milwaukee Bucks Over and Under podcast coming your way very soon. We hope to get Kane Pittman, who will be coming stateside for the Bucks season coming up. So we look forward to having Kane on to kind of kick off our Bucks talk for this upcoming season and what should be an exciting year under Coach Mike Budenholzer. With that being said, this will be the end of the podcast, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks to Alexander Juneau for coming on. You can check him out on Twitter at JunesFishiz. My name is Dylan Piccolo. You can check me out at DP_hoops. And like always, you can check out all the great content we have over at Cream City Central, especially with the Bucks season going on, Packers in full swing, and the Brewers making a late charge for the NL Central Division crown. So once again, thanks for listening. If you'd like to rate and subscribe to our podcast at Cream, you can look for search Apple Podcasts for Cream City Cast, or we're also available on SoundCloud. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your night.